Brought to you in association with Grendel Press. This is Werewolf the Podcast, a serial killer drama.
In this story, I'm returning to the shit old days when I fought for, I suppose, what is now king and country. God bless the Queen. I suppose you've listened to the first few episodes of this wonderful and adventurous podcast. In that case, you should know this already, and you should buy me a coffee at this point as gratitude for my storytelling jocularity. You can do this by following the support the show link in the descriptor. See how I worked that in there? It's good, wasn't it? I was once a worker for the government. Yes, me. A worker for the government. A fucking werewolf as an army man. At least, I think I was part of the army or something like that. I never really knew who I was working for. I just knew they were a pretty big organisation with my leash in their hands. I know what you're thinking. I should know who my bosses were. But to be honest, I didn't really care. I'd been captured while committing minor atrocities, well, I suppose not minor atrocities, in Kosovo in '98. It was a good time. I was killing and maiming and stuff. It was so much fun. God, I love a war zone. I tended to go and spend a little vacation time in each one as they arose. Well, that was until these folk caught me. Now, I just knew that the people who captured me owned me until I, had an opportunity to escape the problem, which they nicely gave me, as you should know, by either reading my book, which is in the description, or listening to the podcast. Thank you. It was going well for them. I was able to do things that others would not do, or could not do, so I was useful. I did a lot of killing and stuff. I even saved the Western world once or twice. Yeah, I know you think I'm just about killing and murdering humans. Well, I am. But sometimes the downside of killing the right people is stopping some, fatal disease made from narwhal sperm and toast crumbs from being released into the world and wiping out the human race. Or you kill one Russian agent and then the nuclear bombs no longer fall on London. I was a bad person, and anti-villain who did good things for you. Well, maybe not for you, but for your rulers. I did a lot of nasty evil shit that can be construed as good evil shit for the lives it saved. To be honest, I also did a lot of evil and conniving shit to keep those in power. I was kind of often asked to deal with situations that no one else could. They found out that I was a ruthless monster capable of atrocious acts of violence and horror, and that I had a devious brain for dealing with these situations that really nice people could not sort out with their nice minds. We also had another incredible mind with over 1,000 years of monstrous experience in my wolf soul posit Fen. He'd been an utter bastard for a very long time. He'd forgotten more mental malevolence than I would ever know. The chief had met me at Victoria Street Station after a journey of a few hours with Fen on the train. I liked the train a lot. If I went by train these days, I did not need the couple of agents that escorted me everywhere. Agents were super fucking annoying, and I had nicknamed them all dicks, because they were all dicks, with chips on their shoulders and egos that had their own gravitational fields. For once, I'd done nothing more horrific than fart while on my journey. It had been horrific when I'd released it into the wild. Thank goodness it had been silent, although it had been extremely violent. It had cleared the passengers from the seats in front of me. A pair of them had looked back as they left. On making eye contact with me, I wafted my hand towards a little old lady who was instantly embarrassed as she became the dealer of the gaseous monster. The entire compartment was disgusted with her. I think they thought she'd shit herself. It was bliss. The chief was in his usual khakis with a group of not-so-secret agents that could easily be recognised as ex-special forces by, the Amiga watches and the North Face jackets. It's pretty easy to identify him. It's like the plainclothes police wear Superdry for some reason. It's just another uniform of sorts. The chief looked a little incongruous with a Costa's coffee in his hand. It just didn't seem to fit this man's image. I was not used to seeing him in human surroundings. We were rushed to the doors as though we were going to be attacked at any moment, then whisked away in big black SUVs and taken to some private airport somewhere, because I wasn't really bothered where. I would go into details, but this is so normal that I learned to switch off to the start of any journey. The bosses liked me a lot because I never really asked about any details. I just kind of accepted what I was told and did my bit. I want to say I was using my skills to centre myself in the universe. I wasn't. I had made eye contact with the little blonde secretary, and I could tell that they were into me. I was the strong, silent type. Well, that's what I pretend to be. Travelling is dull. I amused myself as I ignored all except her, and was ignored by all except her, and just listened to my music and settled back and relaxed. Today's playlist was classic rock. I was told that not interacting with others was the best action on my part, as though I would do anything else. I was told that getting to know people in details was never good. For me, it was not about getting to know people and things. It was the contempt I held for others that set me apart. Humans, in the majority, are dull and boring unless I get to play with them. They are all my playthings or nothing. The flight was long and dull inside the cargo plane. These big noisy planes were the transport of choice for these journeys. It meant that we sat with our ear defenders on so that the engines of the thing did not deafen us. It was the usual shit. Just another day. The plane was full of suits and soldiers. Whatever was going on in the place was going to be serious for me, and I had no idea why I was going yet. We slam landed on another military base in another dry and dusty place. What's a slam landing, you ask? In parts of the world where your government is defending human rights, have you noticed the USA and UK never attack anywhere? Even if they are attacking that country, they are defending it. Amazing. I would assume that if you arrive in a country with guns, bombs and tanks and intentions to do harm to others, then you're attacking that country, not defending something. In these places, the defenders, in inverted commas, are worried that they will be shot at and shot down, so they go from really high to the ground really fast while spraying countermeasures as they come down. It was amusing to see the sweat of the newbies and the dismissive nature of the soldiers that had been there 1,000 times. The suits were shitting themselves as they lashed themselves into their seats, as though in a plane crash or an explosion that would help. Fen and I watched the pretty fireworks that shot out of the wings and the plane's body. It was cool. Part of the slam crash was the slam as it landed. The pilot counted down before the hit to try and take away the shock from the troops on board. Then there was a blam slam, a bounce, and the engines screaming into reverse. I could not hear the squeals and screams over the noise, but I could see them on the people's lips. The nerd across from me on the plane had wet himself and would have PTSD from this landing alone. And what would happen next? Then the next thing was to clear the runway and the aircraft as quickly as possible. There was a considerable commotion on landing as many people ran and things got heated with conversations and general logistics. I think the guy shat himself too, but I would never know as it was too busy, which was a shame. The chief was being talked at from all directions while being escorted off by the dicks. They had their guns ready and were scoping the perimeter. No one spoke to me and purposefully acted like I wasn't there. I fell into a natural bubble of space behind the chief as we made our way across the tarmac to yet another set of black SUVs sitting, waiting for us to get to them so they could whisk us off once again to some other place in this place. As I said, I don't really care when or where I was. I just cared that I needed to do something that was actually probably going to be fun. Then I could go home. We climbed into the back of the SUV with the usual plethora of Special Army soldiers. Ricky Gervais is so funny. I stole Special Army soldiers from his show Extras. God, it pisses off the SAS when you refer to them repeatedly. as special army soldiers. The first time they laugh, that's so funny. The second they smile, and after that they get more and more annoyed as I say it again and again and again and again and again. The SUV was pretty heavy on its wheels and pretty sluggish pulling away, implying that this thing was armoured to the hilt. The soldiers were a mix of specialists, carried personal concoctions of weapons and body armour. Probably mercenaries then. This was one of those off-the-book jobs where if the shit hit the fan, the government would say they had nothing to do with it. They were employing private contractors. That should be said again with inverted commas, as they had been trained and were employed by the government that said they were not employing them. I liked these jobs the best. To be honest, they were always the most exciting and brutal. Often we could do things that we would not be allowed to do if the Queen or King knew about it. We were currently driving down a long, straight, well-made road in a rock-strewn desert. The chief for once was sat next to me and looked quite concerned as we travelled. I wouldn't say I liked it when the chief was concerned about something. It usually means that things are complicated. I don't mind that things are difficult or messy, but I really hate it when things are complicated. Complicated meant time-consuming. I really enjoy walking in, doing the fucking up shit, and then walking out. I hated dealing with the intricacies of diplomacy. Eventually, phone conversations were dealt with, and the chief sat back in his seat, elbow resting on the door of the car as he looked out at the flat scenery. Well, flat scenery, less scenery outside. Well, Will, we have a problem. We're on our way to a very important prison, he said. What they've done here is that they took terrorists and put them in this facility. Now, the issue we have is that the terrorists are from 3 factions. These factions should have not been able to exist in harmony, and what was expected was a bloodbath between them. It was a 96% statistical outcome of doing this, according to the wet-necked pen pushers. So knowing this, they decided to let the UN bring in observers to observe the terrorists killing each other. The thought was that the prison population would kill itself off under the eyes of these observers, getting rid of these dangerous monsters at little risk of looking like they were doing the killing. It would be a right simple way of dealing with the issues. The issue being the terrorists they captured, they wanted to kill off, but didn't really know how to do it. He went quiet, as I could see his confusion and distress. What has fucking happened is a 1% statistical outcome. The 3 factions have got together and united against a familiar foe. They have pooled their information and they're working together. They've made those terrorists in that prison even more dangerous. As you can imagine, this is not something we can allow. The problem is that we cannot get rid of the prisoners under the scrutiny of the UN observers. They were taking the odd individual out into the desert at one time and not bringing them back for a while, but the numbers involved meant that questions were asked after a dozen had gone, and those people could then not be traced. So we've been brought to solve the problem. Fen was sat next to me in an empty seat. Well, it wasn't an empty seat because he was in it, but it looked like an empty seat because he's fucking invisible and no one can touch him. I had demanded it to be left open. He looked at me and I looked at him. This was going to be one of those fucking complicated ones. The terrorist groups are... I waved at the chief to get him to go into silence. Those details didn't really matter. I didn't care who or what their allegiances were for or to. Silence fell on the car. Fen and I sat in due consideration of the facts that we had. So, we need to get rid of a number of prisoners in a prison, but need to do it in a manner that the UN will think it's okay. I asked him, with a laugh escaping me at the end of the stupid question. How am I going to help in this? The chief, at this point, had removed his khaki peak cap and was rubbing his hand through his hair, as he did when he was stressed. He looked at me and nodded. Yes, to the first question. I have no idea about the second question, he replied. Although you and Fen are good at getting away with shit like this and love problem solving, so maybe it's not that you're a werewolf that will help us here. You guys are devious psycho bastards, and that might help us. He smiled as he returned his hat to his head and observed the passing scenery once more. I love it when the chief pays us compliments like this. Some would take offence at such descriptions, but for us, it was a realisation of what we were. Silence again took over the car as brains were put in gear. After some time, Fenn spoke to me through his mental telepathy bullshit. I remember in the Middle Ages a way we used to kill at sieges, he sent me. Okay, I replied. Does that seem applicable here? Okay. In the good old days, you would get to a city or castle and the cowards inside would not come out and fight. They would lock the doors and not let you in as they defended the walls if you tried to get in. They would stand on the town's walls and throw rocks and shit at you while you tried to get in, so we would sit outside it and wait for them to starve. Well, sometimes this might take too much time, especially in certain countries where we knew the other cities and states would send help. What we would do first to see whether or not we could sort it out quick was we'd plant poison in the water source for the place. I considered this. That may be an answer, but if the observers find poison in the water, that could be bad. It might kill the guards and the observers. That might be an issue. Fuck 'em, replied Fenn. I don't think that can be the case, Fenn. We need to kill the prisoners without the observers being able to work it all out. Most poisons can be worked out and spotted and stuff. Honestly, that'll be spotted and we're not allowed to do that. Silence as we both fell into thought, until Fenn's head was raised again. Well then, I've a little idea. One of the ways that we could poison the population was by introducing disease to the castle. We could throw rotten corpses of animals and people over the walls and let them explode in the besieged town. This would spread rotting material all over the place, and that would cause disease and plague to spread. The people would often surrender just to escape the pestilence. The great thing is the prisoners cannot do that. They have to stay because they're prisoners. Obviously, we would wait for these people, and then we'd murder them on the way out. What if we did the same but didn't let the prisoners out, he said. I think the observers may see the dead bodies and the bloated goats that we leave around the place to introduce the disease, I replied. No, Will. These prisoners are probably not vaccinated against diseases like the observers are, so we could. Fenrir is an absolute genius. He has done so much evil shit that nothing is new to him, and he has a shitty thing that you can do in any situation. Oh, I see what you mean. That's a great idea. I smiled and turned to the chief, who listened in somewhat disbelief. He was soon on the phone speaking to the prison as we travelled. He asked the relevant questions to the appropriate people. He found out that there were no vaccinations for certain diseases, and they were actually having a problem with inmates and tuberculosis and typhoid and other deadly diseases, mainly beginning with the letter T, in the prison. They had to quickly remove and isolate anybody with those symptoms to ensure that others didn't catch it, because there wasn't any vaccinations. Tuberculosis is a disease of the lungs and pulmonary system that kills half the people that it infects. It is highly contagious and spreads through the air. Typhoid is a bacterial disease that is spread from inadequate sanitation. It is passed around in fecal matter and piss, often from one unclean person to another clean one. Here was the plan that I gave to the chief. Well, you've probably worked out what we will do now. I suggest that we find diseased folk in the prison and outside the prison, and then mix them in with the prison population in general, who are crushed close together. We also introduce typhoid and not maintain the standard of sanitation. I would leave any other diseases that the boffins could think of to be found to be introduced by themselves. This would kill large sections of the population, and no one would be able to say that they died from people trying to kill them. We would be trying to help them. After the brief conversation, the chief asked the driver to stop the convoy. We pulled over to the side of the very long, straight, lovely road and sat for a moment while he stroked his beard. He kept looking out of the window and then at me. I could see many thoughts passing through his head and multiple emotions passing over his face in a very short amount of time. The engines had stopped, but the necessary air conditioning was whirring in the background so that we didn't cook in these fucking metal ovens. In the vehicle was a lot of confusion. They had no idea what was going on. Fen looked at me and seemed a bit nonplussed about what was happening. With a sigh, the chief turned to look at me. You're such a fucking horrific cunt, he spat at me. The chief didn't swear very often, so this was somewhat of a shock, and it brought warmth to the cockles in my heart. I saw what was happening. He was dealing with one of those things I have never had. His conscience. Fen was laughing. I smiled at the man. I certainly am. He then shouted forward to the driver, "Turn around, let's get back to the fucking airport." 85% of that prison population died before it was sanitised. We had killed well over 1,000 people just by using little bugs and bogies. I love my job.
Brought to you in association with Grendel Press. This is Werewolf the Podcast, a serial killer drama.